I encourage everyone to take a moment and breathe and take a tea cheers with Ajiri tea. Ajiri tea recognizes the beauty in shared stories and shared opportunities. Ajiri sources award-winning tea from Kenya, employs women in the region to handcraft the labels, and sends 100% of the profits back to the region to support orphan education. Save 10% on your order of Kenyan teas and coffee with the code BeautifullyHuman at ajiritea.com. AJIRIT.com. Tea mugs up. Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. I'm Nick Sheesby. In this podcast, I speak with beautiful humans from all around the world, sharing with you their incredible stories, revealing the power in every human story, to spread love and humanity to a world that is in desperate need of it, to show that we can all connect in beautiful ways, no matter where we come from or what we look like. What you will find out is that we are all beautifully human. Let's all be beautifully human. Hello and welcome back to the Beautifully Human podcast. Thank you for listening to this podcast wherever you are in this beautiful world. Today I am hanging out with Tara Boyce, and we have quite the conversation about recovery and just what it takes and the journey along the way. And she and I have a lot in common in this regard. So it was just a really, really nice conversation. Tara is an incredible woman and just has so much to offer as far as strength. So I really hope that you listen and enjoy this conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, follow along on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Follow us on Spotify, rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, just so we can get these stories out to so many more people. And as always, I hope you enjoy this beautiful conversation. So I love to start these off with a very broad and open-ended question and say, Tara, tell me the story of your life.
Well, that is absolutely broad and open-ended. And see, that's tough because I feel like depending on the angle you look at my life from, there could be a lot of different stories. Like there could be, the story of me as a video game enthusiast. There can be the story of me as a Broadway enthusiast, a friend, a terrible girlfriend, except recently. But I guess what would be most relevant to what we're going to talk about and what my own podcast is about is my struggle with alcoholism and mental health challenges that left me institutionalized for a good chunk of my 20s and early 30s, and just kind of completely unable to really create a life story. And like I consider now as well, in terms of the story of my life, just kind of like what kind of story did I think I was telling for most of my life? And I think of genres. I really like fantasy, but there were no dragons in my story, except for the ones in my mind, I guess. But I think I thought that I was in a kind of tragedy or a melodrama, and I was the main character, just kind of orchestrating this tragic story, because I always enjoyed tragic stories myself. I thought that there was something beautiful and integral about being someone who suffered. I thought that suffering itself was somehow beautiful. I like a lot of metal. What can I say?
Yeah.
But I like a lot of Broadway too. Lots of beautiful suffering. So that's the kind of story I think that I was telling unconsciously, that I wanted to be in that kind of story. Now I prefer to consider myself to be in a bit of a dark comedy. I like that a little better. Maybe even a sentimental comedy. But to get more into the actual details of that story, I drank alcoholically for a little over 15 years. And that led me to blow up my life on many fronts. I alienated a lot of people. I hurt a lot of people, and I hurt myself a lot. Just my ideas of who I could be in the world were shaped a lot by that. I ended up in rehab, inpatient 12 times. I was in and out of psych wards quite a few times. And every time I would leave one of these institutions, um, I would really want for my life to be different, but I didn't know how to tell a different kind of story for myself after a while. Like I knew I knew the patterns of what I was doing so well, and it was the only emotional regulation tool that really worked for me. And I feel identity in terms of all that is important too, and that like I had sort of really integrated this identity of myself as a screwed up person. And a screwed up person does screwed up things. I was living in a lot of shame. And yeah, I didn't really think there was much hope for me. I really didn't. And I feel my story, I mean there's a lot of stories of overcoming substance abuse, and I think they're all valuable stories, but I do believe mine is a little bit unconventional in the sense that I did have so many failures, so many times where I had the resources available to make a different choice and I didn't. So many times where I was told by professionals that I was resistant to treatment, that nothing they were doing was working, that like I had been to treatment so many times that there was nothing left to tell me, that I'd already heard all the things that I could possibly hear. And being told that there's like, we don't know what to do with you anymore. And I didn't have the classic kind of hit a bottom, have a moment of clarity and see the light and turn things around, that kind of Hollywood narrative that you see often enough, and that whole myth of like the hitting bottom. I had many bottoms, lots of bottoms, and lots of times where I thought it was that moment, that I thought, oh, after this, they're like, like after waking up in a holding cell, or after waking up on the floor of my kitchen with my head bashed open, after all the times that I woke up in a stranger's bed, after, having to be restrained in a hospital, and managing to weasel out of my restraints and running down the side of the road in a hospital. Like there were so many moments that I'm like, well, this has got to be it. This has got to be the time. But it never was. And, until the last 3 years. And I also didn't have the classic, go to a 12-step meeting and find community and see the light and find God and get better. I have found a good support system in those communities now, but it certainly didn't happen easily or automatically. But so, yeah, I guess I'm not sure how far you want me to go in terms of the specific anecdotal details. I mean, there's lots of stories there. But
Yeah. I mean, you and I have a very similar one, because mine was less than half the time of your drinking career, but mine was very heavy, very quick. But there's differences. I had a very hard rock bottom. I was fully jaundiced. I was beginning stages of liver failure, and I was told that if I didn't stop drinking, that I would be dead, and very quickly dead. So I also like that you were talking about how every road to recovery is so different, because it is. Like, we all need to get to recovery if we're in those points of our lives. But I always tell people who are looking to go into that you can do it any way you want, as long as recovery is the goal and you get there. It doesn't matter which way you go. So what did you find, I guess, because you had so many, like you said, so many rock bottoms and so many times where it was just like terrible, terrible moments and in and out of rehabs. What was finally your one? What finally kicked in and you were like, okay, I got to stop this shit?
that, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's wonderful, because I was also told at a point that, if I don't stop drinking, I'm going to die. And I was like, we'll see.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing about that too is it wasn't a specific moment in time. Many of the times before where like I had done something awful that, I couldn't forgive myself for, like cheat on someone that I cared about or steal from my family or whatever. Like those moments I thought, okay, well, this is going to be the moment. But I've been sober for a little over 3 years, and when I went into detox the final time, I didn't think it was going to be any different from all the other times. I really thought that I was just going there to kind of get my health back. I'm going to take another shot at this, but I was beaten down. I actually remember walking into the detox and thinking, like, I like this place better than my other detox. They let me bring my phone in. I get to bring my laptop and watch Sailor Moon while I'm here. They let me go out and smoke. This is great. I have to remember to make sure I come to this detox next time.
Yeah.
So I was not at a point where I was like, I gotta make it work this time. And in many ways, I think that might have been part of the contributing factor of why it worked, because I was kind of beaten down. I wasn't like, there was no story I could tell myself about how alcohol could work in my life that I believed anymore. I didn't have the mental energy or the resources left to come up with a story like that. And I think I didn't have it in me to fight against it anymore. And you would think that you're supposed to be fighting against it, right? But the way I was fighting against it was desperately trying to find a loophole and
Right.
desperately trying to find a way in which I was different. Like you hear that all the time. Like I was going to be different from all the alcoholics.
Of course. Yeah.
I was going to like I was going to be the one who made it work. But I was so beaten down and defeated. I just kind of decided to almost give away my agency in a way, just to be like, look, I give up. I guess there was a form of surrender that happened. I'm like, I'm just going to go through the motions. I'm just going to do whatever people tell me to do. I'm just going to, I'm just going to just kind of play charades of my life. So I went to the detox and I went to the rehab afterwards, and it turned out that they did not want to keep me because I had been there so many times before. And so when I left, usually after about 30 days, which was that rehab's time frame, I would be feeling really good, and I would also be feeling kind of invincible. And I would also be feeling like it was time to negotiate with my alcoholism, like, because I'd be feeling very powerful. And I'd been doing all this self-reflection. I would be feeling so much better physically. But after about 12 days, I was still raw. I was still feeling this sense of utter defeat. And rather than having these mental negotiations with myself about how maybe I could plan a relapse, I was scared. I was scared that I was going to relapse, rather than being, scared that someone would find out about my relapse. And that was a really different paradigm shift for me. And I really did just start going through all the motions, such as like going to my outpatient program, going to a meeting every day, and doing all the things that my family, my parents were allowing me to live with them after everything. And I'm so grateful to them, because I don't know how well I would have done it myself. And they started breathalyzing me. And of course, I wasn't too pleased with that arrangement at first, but it really helped, because it took away that level of negotiation I could do with myself about, oh, maybe they won't notice. If I just have like 2 drinks, they're not going to notice. It doesn't count. And that was a big thing too. Like I always thought that as long as I wasn't drunk and blowing up my life, then it didn't count. If no one knew about it, it didn't count. If I could fool other people, it didn't count. So I just went through the motions, and and it just started to feel, and somehow like the whole acting as if thing really worked for me. Like even when I would go to meetings, I never felt all that comfortable in them, because I'm more a secularly minded kind of humanist person philosophically. And a lot of the idea of finding something external to me, such as a more metaphysical higher power, did not sit well with me. But I thought, I'm just going to put that on the shelf for now. I'm going to focus on, the community aspect. I'm going to focus on going, doing those damn steps they keep telling me is a good idea to do. And,
Yeah.
and, I kind of got off my soapbox a bit. And I started saying things in meetings that I didn't actually believe,
Mm.
which is a little odd, but like that I wanted to believe.
Okay.
Like I wanted to believe that I was so grateful for just having that day of of being sober, as even though that was true, but it was also true that I was riddled with anxiety and I was so uncomfortable in my own skin when I was sober. I didn't like the person I was when I was sober, which was tough because
Yeah.
I felt like all the kind of pizzazz that I had, the impulsivity, the extroversion, the like all those things that I associated with who I was, I associated with this persona that only came out when I was drinking. And when I wasn't drinking, I felt like I had the personality of a rock because I was so crippled with my own anxiety. And I had never come to a point where I'd been sober long enough for my actual self to emerge. So I just kind of thought it was going to be that way forever. I just thought I was going to be this kind of zombified version of myself forever. Because I'm like, well, at least I'm not ending up in emergency rooms every other week. But man,
Mm.
I'm a really, really boring person. And also just the layers of anxiety, like the thinking about what other people are thinking about me at all times. The social anxiety was through the roof. But I didn't talk about that all that much in my meetings or in my outpatient or in my therapy. Like a lot of all the things. I didn't talk about that as much as I talked about how I was grateful and how I really wanted to make this time different because I'd spent a lot of time thinking about the problem. Like I'd spent a lot of time kind of diagnosing myself and a lot of time almost justifying the pain that I felt and why it was therefore okay for me to act however I wanted to because
Mm.
I was in so much pain. A lot of time picking at scabs, or even picking at scars that had healed in rehab and then crying that they hurt. Because I
Yeah.
thought that was what rehab was supposed to do. I thought you were supposed to find your pain and I thought you were supposed to like nurture that pain like it was like a kitten or something. And then, you know, but it turned out that was really not the right way to go about it for me because every time I did that, I just came up with reasons why it was okay for me to drink and
Mm.
why, like, because if you had as much pain as I did, of course.
Yeah. 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 It is like throughout that whole, as you were just talking, I was like, man, that was, it's amazing. Like, how when we're in those moments it's just like, oh, we're not that bad, even though
Mm.
like I know I'll speak for myself that I mean I knew I was that bad. I was out drinking everybody and like people were always talking to me and being concerned, but I was invincible. I didn't think anything was coming, and it was just like I'm young. Like by the time I hit my rock bottom, that was at age 33.
Mm.
And it's like before that, I was in my late 20s, my early 30s, and I was like, no, I'm good. I'll be fine, and
Yeah.
yeah, just all these stories that we tell ourselves. And also something that stuck out with me is I have found now in my sobriety, and you said you're just over 3 years, and I'm probably a few months past you in it. So I'm coming up on 4 years in August. So
Woohoo.
we're pretty close in our time
Mm-hmm.
frame too on our sobriety, which is pretty cool. But like I think one of the biggest shifts for me was, and you were touching on this, was like, saying you had the personality of a rock and like not knowing who you are as a sober person, because mine, like I said, was half the time that you were drinking. So I can't even imagine the persona that evolved in 15 years of heavy drinking and just being extroverted, because I'm the same way. I'm very extroverted when I drink. I'm very introverted when I don't. And
Mm.
I know, had you asked me during my times of drinking if I would have been like, if I would have thought I would have lived such a fulfilled life and enjoyed my time more so now than when I was drinking. Do you find that to be true as well? Like, have you gotten to that point where you feel like you're having more fun, you're living a more full life? Because again, had someone said that to me, like, Nick, you'll get sober one day and you'll be having a blast, I'd have been like, you're fucking crazy.
Yeah, sure.
No possible way can I have fun without drinking or being sober. And it just sounds so lame and so boring and all of the descriptors. Have you found that with your sobriety now?
Oh, yeah, like 100 million%.
Yeah.
Uh, I, I just once again, I never allowed myself to stay sober long enough for the awkward phase to end. And I'm so much more comfortable in my own skin now than I was when I was active, when I was sober or drunk or whatever, because there was always this air of desperation to the drinking. It's like, I got to get to this next, I got to get to this next place. I got to get to this, this cool zone where I feel okay. But then you get there and you want more and you want more and you want more. You're always chasing and chasing and chasing. There was never this ability to just be like I'm okay with how I feel right now. And most of the time, like, I am okay with how I feel, but if I'm not, I can do something about it that's non-destructive. Like even about a couple of days ago, I went to my first kind of rock and roll metal concert in Montreal since I've been sober. It was a band called Nightwish. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yep,
They're a Finnish
definitely.
symphonic metal band. And they're one of my favorite bands. And I just recognized how much I was enjoying myself without
Yeah.
doing all these mental calculations in my head about how much I should be drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost every other event, I would be thinking like, okay, well, I don't want to be too drunk. I want to be right because I don't want to black out. I actually want to remember the thing. I actually want to, not be kind of going in and out of consciousness during the thing. But I still want to be buzzed. Otherwise, I can't enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
But just realizing that I was having a great time because I love the music and I love my company and I love the whole thing. And there was I wasn't distracted by doing these mental calculations the entire
Yeah.
time. And I was always doing those mental
Mm-hmm.
calculations. Every emotion I felt had something to do with the presence of or the absence of alcohol.
Yeah.
And realizing that there's a whole spectrum of emotions that have nothing to do with the presence of or absence of alcohol. It was just like I almost feel like a baby learning how to like see the world for the first time in a lot of ways. It's like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole spectrum, and I even enjoy the negative emotions because
Mm-hmm.
I know that they're real and I know that I can handle them, and it gives me a sort of level of resilience, and I realize that they go away too without me
Yeah.
having to do anything about it. Like I don't have to take a drink. I don't have to act out. I don't have to anesthetize myself in some way, that if I just kind of recognize if I'm feeling anxious or sad, that it just sort of passes on its own and I can go about my business. And sometimes like, I feel like I spent my entire life running away from this dragon
Mm.
or like this tiger. And I was running and running and running and running, but I never stopped to turn around to realize that the tiger was just like I don't know, like a regular cat. And I'm like, why the hell was I afraid of that? Like, yeah, it could be annoying sometimes if it scratches you, but it's not life or death, and neither are just feelings. And
Right.
also just creativity too was a huge thing for me, that I've been a creative person as long as I can remember. And I always loved writing music, performing, all those things. And then at a certain point, all those things that I loved got linked up with alcohol. It's like, I can't do
Mm.
that unless I'm drinking because I need to loosen up or what have
Sure.
you.
Yeah.
Um, and then it got to a point where I was drinking so much I wasn't doing anything creative anyways, because just like there was nothing there. Uh, and then after a while, after I'd been sober for a while, my ability to express myself creatively came back. And similarly to having a good time at a show or anything else, I realized that it wasn't okay. Like the muses are fickle, it's true, but at the same time, like I don't have to be like artificially curating that experience for myself. I can be creative, and there's an authenticity about it. And that's just the thing. There's an authenticity to experience. If I'm hanging out with a friend or a loved one or my boyfriend and we're having a really good time, or I'm feeling strong feelings in any way, like I know that they're real. I don't have to like wake up the next day and be like, okay, what did I do? Like what happened? Or do I actually feel that way? Do I actually, did I actually have a good time? Do I actually like that person? Like
Right.
all those things. Like there's this ability to just kind of show up for life in a way that it's like, oh, this is, like I can take ownership of this experience now. So it's so different.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you were saying, there were so many ridiculous things that I was focusing on, and they were all
Mm.
drinking. Like, for me, I work in the music industry, so I'm constantly
Oh,
traveling with
cool.
bands, and so like if I was going to a different state or a different province, I knew their alcohol laws, so that if it was a Sunday in Indiana and they don't sell booze on a Sunday, I would stock up on a Saturday because I knew I needed my booze all day.
Ah,
And
yeah.
so it was crazy. I knew almost every state in the states liquor laws. I knew liquor laws in most of Canadian provinces, and if I ever went overseas, I figured those out too. And it was just, yeah, the effort that you put in, and like, getting to that good buzz where you're not forgetting things, or for me, I could still function at work, and not and
Mm.
like I'd be fun and I'd be having a good time, and that was part of my job too, and that was okay. But like, it is insane how much effort you put in just to get those drinks and get enough, or like, never have too little, maybe not have too much, but then you do have too much because it's just the nature of
Mm.
who I was, for sure. um but yeah, it's really cool, and I love, like you said, that these feelings come and go, and it's really good to feel those, and they do come, and then they'll go away. And I think we all, anybody that drinks heavily, think that, oh, we're drinking, so those feelings are gone. And it's like, no, 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 no,
No,
no. No,
they're just
no,
on
no.
hold.
Yeah. They're there and they're coming back with a vengeance. You're just drowning them at those moments. So yeah, I love that you got to go back out and enjoy yourself, especially at concerts. That's such a fun environment to be in, and not be drunk. Like, I had to relearn how to work in that environment and then go
Mm.
to concerts, and I've learned how to enjoy concerts now, and I think it's because I'm not drinking. Because if I went to a show, I knew when the bars closed, and it was this like whole attitude of like, gotta get it, and I don't want to take an hour off, so I gotta get really drunk, and then that hour won't be so bad, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I wouldn't be enjoying the show because I'd be like, oh shit, okay, I got 15 minutes and the bar closes. And then I'd go and I'd get, yeah, it's just ridiculous. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
all the mental calculations, like how much can I
yeah,
sneak in, like taking these little
right.
mini bottles and hiding them in my bra and like my, and like cuz I'm afraid that they're going to like strip search me or something. And
Yeah,
then yeah, getting nervous when I know like, oh shit, the store stopped selling liquor here at 11, be getting nervous towards 11, being like, should I run out and like
yeah,
grab a couple of like grab a bottle of wine and chug it and then come back because the drinks at this venue are really expensive,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then
yeah.
like just doing all those mental calculations. I was never in the moment because I was constantly just doing this alcoholic arithmetic all the time.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Like, yeah, how much it engrosses every part of your life. And I don't miss those. I don't miss those calculations. I enjoy just being like, okay, cool. It's 2 in the morning, and not like, I'm just going to go home, or it's 10 at night, whatever it is. Like, I don't have to worry about, yeah, like getting to the liquor store before it closes. That was a panic in my mind every
No,
day.
oh yeah,
If I didn't get
full
there
on
like before the
panic.
show started, it'd be like, oh God, I got to get done with work because I got to run. And it'd be like, it's 7 blocks. Okay. It's like 10-minute walk, whatever it was. It was just
Mm.
mania. It was crazy.
Yeah, and like and the absolute travesty about like making a miscalculation. It's like
Oh,
as you
right.
mentioned, I would always try to bring like just the right amount of alcohol home with me because I remember this funny quote by Stephen King. He was a recovering alcoholic too, and they asked him, "How much do you drink?" And he said, "All of it."
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the thing. I would drink all of it.
Yeah.
I, so I reasoned, if I bring, if I bring a gallon of vodka home, oh, like goodbye the rest of my week, and who knows where I'm going to end up. So I would try
Mm-hmm.
to bring home just enough. So
Yeah.
I would be able to get through the night, have a little bit for the morning so I could get myself
Yep.
started because I didn't want to be waking up in the middle of the night with in crippling withdrawal. But every once in a while I would make a miscalculation, go a little bit overboard and drink all of it that night, wake
Mm-hmm.
up in the middle of the night and have nothing left and
Oh God,
go
that's
on
what
to a
it was.
full on panic. I would be
Mm-hmm.
running around the house here, like looking for anything that might contain little bits of alcohol. Like my parents had to start to lock up the food extracts, like the vanilla and the almond extract, and like the
Damn.
coconut, all
Yeah.
those things, because I would drink them all.
Mm-hmm.
Mouthwash, that was put on lockdown too. And at a point I even had a couple of teaspoons of rubbing alcohol because I just didn't I was in that point of
Yeah.
desperation, and I really don't miss that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you were getting to going through your rehabs, what was your withdrawal like? Did you, because what I learned, and I didn't know this, was that you can physically die from coming off of alcohol, and most other drugs you would just want to die. You
Yeah.
wouldn't physically die. And
Yeah,
most people I
there
know
is a
that come off
distinction
of
there.
drugs, like, it's not that you don't want to die. You want to die, but you won't. But with alcohol, you can for sure die. So what was your process with that like?
Well, me and withdrawal have a very tortured and complicated relationship. I feel like my first unmedicated withdrawal, like the first withdrawal that I went through cold, that was just terrifying to me. It made a huge difference in aggravating my alcoholism that point forward because I was so afraid of going through that again.
Mm,
Um, the first time I went through an at home withdrawal that was just terrible. I couldn't sleep. I was kind of going in and out of these kind of cold sweat hallucinations. I was having convulsions. I felt like there were bugs crawling on me. I felt when I did start to drift off to sleep, I felt like my soul was leaving my body, and then I would wake
mm,
up and like then it would shoot up in terror because I thought if I close my eyes, I'm gonna die.
mm-hmm,
I was like projectile throwing up everywhere. Sometimes I couldn't even get out of bed because it was so, like I couldn't, like I was so dizzy I couldn't walk. It was so terrifying. I'd never felt that awful before in my life. And from that point forward, I'm like, I'm never going to let that happen again. So sometimes when I would go through a specifically bad period of drinking, I would be like, okay, I have to stop. And I would stop for a little while on my own, but I'm like, I'm never going to do that again. So that's really when my alcoholism went from like, I would have periods of sobriety to like, nope, like, cause
mm-hmm,
I'm just so scared of that happening to me again. And it still did a few times at times when I needed to dry out because, I ended up in the hospital and they weren't medicating. There were other times where I did go through a really bad cold withdrawal, but, when I was able to do it medically, basically they just give you Valium or Ativan, because the why withdrawal is so catastrophic for alcoholics is because your nervous system is so disoriented and so out of whack. They have to give you something else that will calm down your nervous system and kind
mm-hmm.
of taper you off it. That's why seizures can happen, and that's the main reason people can die. So when I would go to the hospital, they would just give me some happy pills, and I would be fine.
Mm,
But yeah, the fear of the withdrawal would really upped my alcoholism because then I realized
mm,
that, in the morning when I was feeling all, like, and I'm like, well, this is actually withdrawal that's happening. And rather than just feel awful for the next couple of hours until it kind of chills out a bit or until I start drinking, I just start drinking in the morning and that doesn't
mm-hmm,
happen. And, I had so many times where I thought like, okay, well, I need to taper. I can't stop drinking. I need to taper because otherwise I'll go into withdrawal, and that's terrible. Um, but the tapering rarely worked. You know, I would get to a point where it was sort of manageable and I'd be like, well, I feel great now. And then I'd just start drinking more again, you know? So it is a very, very terrifying experience. And I don't recommend it to anyone, which is why I find sometimes when people can be rather irresponsible when they say, you know, just stop drinking, you know, or sometimes in 12-step communities too, where they don't necessarily, where it's sort of like there's the spiritual awakening model of recovery, which, you know, spirituality is important to me in various ways, but sometimes you have to go to a bloody hospital. And I'm lucky enough that I live in Canada where we do have socialized medicine, so I could go to the hospital. I don't know what the hell I would do if I lived in the States. I'm pretty sure I would be dead, because for the amount of times where I needed to go to the hospital, I mean, not only would my parents have had to mortgage their house, they probably would have had to, like, I don't know what they would have had to do, but it probably would have been very illegal to raise all that money.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was in the hospital for 3 days not here. I'm not in the States right now, but in the States, in Ohio, and my bills came to almost 90,000 US.
Oof.
Which I don't.
This was 3 days?
3 days.
3 days, $90,000?
Mm-hmm.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, then that's worse than I thought.
Yeah, it's bad. Because they did all the testing, they were doing, I mean, every test they possibly could, taking as much blood as they could, and yeah, it was crazy. I tell people that a lot, and especially when they're not from the States, they're just like, what? Are you kidding me? That's insane. And it is. I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. But it's I think the biggest takeaway that I think with that is, you know, just the fear of withdrawal makes you drink more, which is so.
Yes. Oh yeah.
I mean, I did the same. I mean, by the end of my drinking, if I was breathing, I was drinking. If I was like even in the middle of the night, I would roll over and I'd have my favorite shots, whatever it was. I'd have a bottle of that
tucked under the pillow.
yeah. So it'd be like, just like I have a, you know, bubbly water beside me right now. It'd be like, okay, I'm asleep, and you know, shot a fireball in the middle of the night. Just what everybody wants, you know.
Yeah, you start to feel that tightening in your back, that kind of like creepy, like sort of feeling. You're like, oh, gotta get rid of that.
Yeah, and there were many times where I'd wake up and I was like grabbing my heart, and I was like, okay, don't go. Like it was weird, and I was like, saying I was okay, but it was just like, oh God. And then I would go back to sleep, and I'd be like, well, I hope I'm not dying, but I gotta sleep some.
Yeah, no, it's really terrifying, and I'm quite baffled by by the fact that I'm even alive right now. Like I'm just so. It's just like they say, you know, a cat has 9 lives. Like I've had so many lives.
Yeah,
you know, and
I know. I'm hanging by a thread on my last one. If I'm a cat and I had 9, I'm like 8.75. I'm pretty close to all of them. So I'm on my best behavior now.
that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to shift gears a bit. Well, I'm shifting gears, but I always ask this to everybody, as we talked a little bit about travel throughout our stories. Well, I did a little bit, but I love to ask, if I came to you and there's, you know, restrictions are going away places, so it's more of an open world again. If I came to you and I had a ticket to anywhere in the world, and I just said, where would you go? So yeah, where would you go if I gave you a plane ticket to anywhere?
Probably Japan.
All right.
I've always had this obsession with Japan, and it's probably just because I fell in love with Sailor Moon when I was a kid, and because I'm obsessed with Japanese role-playing games, and I just find Japanese culture to be fascinating, and not just in the games. I would have this fear that I would get there and I would expect it to be as represented in anime and video games, and it would be so different. I would have like a culture shock from my own expectations of the culture. And then it's not that I've never seen actual footage of what Japan looks like in real life. It's not all animated. Right. You know, I get there, I'm like, well, like, why isn't this pixelated?
Right. you are real this weird.
Where are the subtitles?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we
But
all probably would think that going there.
yeah, but it's definitely on my bucket list as a place to check out, just because it's so different from culturally from where I am too. I mean, I did make it to Norway a couple of years ago to visit my best friend,
Yeah.
and that was amazing. But it was mainly there to see her, and certainly wasn't as much of a culture shock. Sure, there's a language difference, but
Yeah. But
it's
yeah.
a similar sort of westernized
Hmm.
side of kind of vibe.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I
it's
mean, even in the smaller places, people speak English. They might be nervous
mm-hmm.
to speak English, which is something I'm learning a lot is most people speak English very well. They're just nervous to speak with someone that is only speaking English. So, yeah, it's not nearly as much of a culture shock. But yeah, I've asked this to 80 some people on this podcast, and not everybody, and I'm not saying that your answer isn't good, but there's so many people that are just fascinated by Japan, and I'm definitely one
Mm.
of them too. I want to go there so badly, and everyone I know that's been there is just like, oh my god, it's the greatest place on earth, you have to
Oh well,
go.
that's good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, vastly different than anything they've experienced, but like they just absolutely love it. So
Mm.
I mean, if I could, I would love to give you that ticket. I've had people come
Is
on
that
and
my is
just
that my prize for coming on
yeah.
the podcast? Do I get a
Wouldn't that be
prize?
badass if I
That would be super badass.
every single person that comes on at the end, I'm just like, hey, you remember what you just asked or what you answered my
Yeah.
question as? You get to go.
Yeah, it's like that secret millionaire show where it's like
Oh
you're
yeah.
you're like a secret millionaire podcaster, and people don't know when they find you, and then at the end you're like, "Hey, free plane ticket to wherever your heart wants to go."
Yeah. I mean, that would be more motivation for me to like make a ton of money is to I've always said though, if I won the lottery and I just had tons and tons of money, I would call people up, I would call you up and I would do that same thing and I'd be like, Tara, where are we going? Bring some
Yeah.
friends, I'll meet you there. And then I think it would be really cool to experience travel through somebody else's eyes. That's why I think it would be so fun to do that. Is just like call you up and then we go to Japan and then I call like my friend Mike up and I'm like, all right, Mike, where are we going? And then I meet him and some friends there. I just think it would be so neat because there's so
Yeah.
many places in the world and I've had so many people tell me that they want to go to these places and I'm like, where the hell is that? And I look it up and I'm like, yeah, no idea. No idea that
Yeah.
was even on
And
this globe.
for sure. And I really, really value experiences so much now. I find that to be a sort of commonality of a lot of people who are in recovery, either from addiction or illness or mental illness or trauma or something. Is like there's this appreciation for what life has to offer,
Yeah.
and this desire to kind of like just experience new things and and because for myself, I was blocking out what life had to offer for
Mm.
such a long time, and I wasn't appreciating anything, and I wasn't like I don't want to say like I wasted all that time, because obviously lessons were learned and I needed to do what I needed to do and all that stuff, but at the same time I did I wasn't present for my own life for a good chunk of it. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like I'm almost greedy for experience. Like I just want to have as many as I can, because it's almost like I woke up in a 30-something-year-old body and I was like, where did my 20s go? It's like,
Yeah.
what happened to them? Like there was so much that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's still so much I want to do, but it's still tough because I'm still learning how to walk again
Yeah.
in terms of who I am in the world, and you know, unfortunately, a lot of my interests don't really lend themselves to globe trotting. Just in that, like I have a podcast too, and it doesn't really produce much income,
Right.
or any.
Yeah.
And I also, I'm writing a
Yeah.
musical that also doesn't produce any income, and my work doesn't really produce much income, and like I'm very attracted to creative things, but I'm not very good at monetizing those things. I
That's
guess
always
it's
the tough
almost,
part.
yeah, I guess it's like that kind of like idea being a 90s kid that, it's like, you're supposed to, la vie boheme, you're supposed to do art for the art and there's no selling out and
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, and it's so true though, like learning all these things of like coming back into the world after just being drunk for so long, it's like
Yeah.
it's really really um rewarding and wonderful and nice to just have experiences again. And I think when you come close to brushes with death, well, I mean, I know because I
Mm.
personally did that it was like, holy shit. Yeah. Like you said, I woke up in this 33-year-old body and I was like, okay, I've experienced a lot. Again, like I said, I'm very fortunate to be in a creative field where I get to travel a lot. So I've seen a lot of
Yeah.
things and like, but still I didn't experience them. I was so drunk in so many places in this world. And like when you start to get to experience life again and just like really really experience it, it just makes it so much better in every single possible way. Than you're getting the emotions, you're seeing the vibrance of that experience, you're active in the conversations, you're laughing because you want to laugh, or all these things that turned into like you just as this like manic laughing person because you were so drunk, and it might not even have been a funny moment, but it was just like ha ha ha, and Nick, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well Nick, there he goes again. Nick's back, and yeah, I just think it's such a, a beautiful experience going through, those experiences that we both have, and coming out on this side. And it's I imagine even though they're not monetarily amazing yet, that you're still really enjoying your podcast and you're loving having the creativity to write your musical.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. Of course. Of course. I mean, yeah, the musical thing was kind of a joke to someone where I was like, yeah, I haven't written music in so long. I wouldn't even know what to write about because they say write what you know. I'm like, what the hell would I write? Rehab the musical? And I was like, so that's what I started doing. And
amazing.
yeah, and the podcast also was just I started writing a kind of memoir of my alcoholism, and I'm very perfectionistic, and it's one of my biggest challenges to overcome, and that I'm like, I could be writing this thing forever, and then editing it and re-editing it, and totally losing that kind of you know sort of newly esque sober perspective on things, and you know, and no one's probably ever going to read it. So I'm like, what if I released? And I found myself listening to a lot of audiobooks and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like and podcasts. I'm like, well, what if I just release my memoir as a podcast? Like it's like kind of like a serial thing, like chapter one, chapter two. And so I started doing that, and it's not just an audiobook. I talk about stuff and I ask the audience to talk to me about things, and I'm really attracted to it because it's like it's hard work because it is a creative process, but
Mm-hmm.
um it's also like I am creatively implicated in my own recovery,
Yeah.
and so it's like I have to be like the recovery person in my podcast. So like I'm trying to find all the ways that I can to make it so like my current identity is really wrapped up in being someone who just doesn't drink anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of all these protective mechanisms to have in place to like make my recovery meaningful to me. It's not something I have to do, and it's not just this thing that's necessarily dependent on external things either. It's not like, oh, I'm only sober because I need to go to these meetings, or I'm only sober because I need to follow this code of conduct or whatever. It's like, no, it's integrated into my identity in
Mm-hmm.
a way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And yeah, it is amazing how the pendulum swings to that other side where it was like, man, this was the only thing that I ever did, and now I'm like, I find a massive strength and identity in being sober. And
Mm-hmm.
it comes out in my podcast all the time. These stories are more related to someone else's journey through their life, but obviously it comes out and comes through. And I started working with this thing called the Human Library, where I get to share my story, and I'm a book in the Human Library, so that's been really fulfilling. And it's really nice to like have had those experiences. Yeah,
I've
it's
heard
really
about that. That's when
incredible.
someone walks into a library and they kind of take out a person. You just sit down and
Yeah,
talk to them for a while.
yeah,
That is
it's amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
I
yeah, it's
love
so
that.
good. It's so fulfilling, and it's again like you said, like I've found so much identity in this version of me now, and
Mm.
nobody can meet me within 15 minutes of knowing me. You'll know that I'm a sober person, and you'll probably know a little bit of my story because it just comes out. I'm proud of myself. I'm happy with myself. I'm happy with how I feel, and life is just really good. And I think that comes out because of my attitude. I'm always happy to like go do something, and someone's like, "Well, it's this time," and I'm like, "I don't care. Let's go do it," because you know nobody knows what tomorrow brings.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful for tomorrow, but it's not guaranteed. So why not? Why would I not take the time to do that now instead of not doing that? It's total mind switch when you've lived some way for so long and just numbed yourself to everything, that when you
Yeah.
open up and you just see this beautiful world, it's hard not to do that.
Yeah, just coming from a place where just like living in fear, like just wanting to protect yourself from life. Like alcoholism is sort of just being afraid of for me it was just being afraid of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To just being in a place where it's uh hmm, I I guess it's a little it can be a little tough for me sometimes because I think about that person who was so afraid of life and was so um so eager to block out all the good things about the world, like those real moments of connection,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of adventure and learning how to do a new thing or having a new experience, all the things that just light me up now. Those were the
Yeah.
things that I was terrified of when I was
Same.
active, and I have a hard time relating to that person now. I like
Mm-hmm.
it's just sort of like how was I ever that person? And it's kind of confusing to me at times because I have a lot of compassion for that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's only by, I don't want to say luck because there was a lot of effort that went into it too, but it's it's very plausible that I could have remained that person until the day that I died. And I'm just so grateful that I had the opportunity to experience life as this incarnation of myself.
Yeah.
And I
Same.
feel that it also allows me to be a little less judgmental of other people too, because I
Mm-hmm.
was mired uh, in my own limiting idea about reality for such a long time, and I had professionals trying to pull me out of my own bullshit for years and years and years and years, and it wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And if I see someone who maybe I think is a little judgmental or isn't living their best life in whatever way, like how the hell am I going to judge them? And I just sort
Right.
of a sort of appreciation for like living like that is suffering. And when I was living like that, it was suffering as well, but I couldn't seem to find my way out of it until I did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think that you summed it up perfectly. I think that's just I never have judgment. I just have compassion for someone in that moment. I watch them and I'm like, yeah, you need somebody that's going to just like be there and care for you and be compassionate for you and not judge you, because I think that was my biggest strength, was when I started to see myself as human again and other people were seeing me
Mm.
as human. Because I always tell people too, with addiction, you're not you're not a terrible person because you have an addiction. Like every single human on this earth has an addiction. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most harmful ones. I mean, but also you can be addicted to food. You can be addicted to sex, porn, coffee, your phone, the
Success,
TV, success,
money.
money. I mean,
Yeah.
my buddy, he has a 2-month-old daughter now, and she's addicted to her pacifier, and she's 2 months old and she already has an addiction. But that's just the way it
Yeah,
works.
well,
Like everything in
I
this
think it
world.
works on a spectrum, like
Yeah.
there's like a spectrum of addictive behaviors. I know people with kids who say that they struggle to not be on their phones when they're hanging out with their kids, and it's tough for them
Hmm.
because that's a real it has a hold on them. And there's so many things in this world that can have a hold on us that kind of take us out of experience. And yeah, so.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think there's a good, when somebody's stuck in that moment and they don't think there's any power that they have, I just like to say, like, first off, you're not the only person that struggles with alcohol. You're not going to be the last one, and
Yeah.
you're for sure going to have other addictions, and they might just be better for you. But like, you're not a stupid person because you're
No.
addicted to something, which I think
Or
so many
or a
people,
bad person
or a bad person. Yeah. Like,
or
again,
hopeless
or,
or
and yeah, all of that, that's
or
where I like,
alone.
yeah, right. Any of
and,
those
the, and
things, like,
yeah. And the crazy thing was, as much as I obviously knew I wasn't the only alcoholic on the planet, and I knew that I wasn't the only alcoholic who struggled with some mental health things too. Like, I had been to rehab, I had been to meetings, I knew there were hundreds of people that I knew personally who had the very similar problems. I still believed that I was the only person who had ever felt the way that I felt.
of course,
Like, I
yeah.
still believe that, okay, well, these people might have the same problem on paper, but they don't have the same emotional complexity as I do, or they don't, whatever,
Right.
whatever story I was telling myself
Hmm.
about, like, why it was harder for me and why it was different for me. And I remember reading a memoir when I was uh, a little younger called Wasted by Mario Hornbacher. And it wasn't actually about alcoholism, it was about anorexia and bulimia. And she later went on to publish books about recovery from alcoholism. And I related so much to her writing style and her way of describing um, like her emotional landscape, I guess you could say, that I'm like, oh, well, that person seems to think like me. So if that person can think like me and also be an alcoholic and also be in recovery and also have addictions and also overcome them, then maybe me too. But somehow, having
Hmm.
met like hundreds and probably hundreds of people in my life who had had those experiences, didn't connect with me. But kind of getting into the mind of someone who who explored the depths of those emotions, that's sort of what did it for me in terms of making me feel less isolated. You
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I love that. All right.
yeah.
I have two more questions for you, and then I will let you plug your podcast so anybody listening that wants to check it out can check it out. First question is, what would you want the world to know about you, Tara?
I would want the world to know that there's a lot more to me than just someone who used to drink and doesn't, though that's a really, that's a big part of me. Because what I think is really important is that when I was drinking, that was kind of the only thing about me. But now that I'm not, there's so many more things about me that are important, that I do love Japanese role-playing games and that I love Broadway musicals and that I'm a good friend. I like gardening, I like cycling, I like playing board games and getting mad when I don't win. Like there's and like I like baking. I there's just so many things about me that are able to flourish now that I'm not drinking. So that's the cool thing about recovery, is you get to be more than just that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have known you for almost an hour now, and I think you're a wonderful and super fun person to talk to. So
Aw, I think you're awesome too.
thank you. I love that. All right. Last question is, if you were standing on a stage after your musical, and your musical, literally every single person in the whole world was there, and you had the ear of every single person in the world, what would you say to them?
is this sort of like my words of wisdom that I could pass on in this context?
Yep.
Okay. You don't have to believe your mind.
That's a really powerful one. That's a good paradigm shift for people.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the thing that kind of really helps me on a day-to-day basis, not get mired down by, just kind of having that separation between, my experience and my thoughts about the experience, and realize that like I don't have to believe every stream of consciousness thing that comes through my head, because I was working with a very self-destructive mind for a really long time. So some of those programs are still there. They still run on occasion, and I don't have to believe everything they say to me. Kind of like, like when you see a sports game, it shows how much I'm yeah, that's not one of the things about me. But, they have the commentary guys who are talking about what's happening in the game, and then you have the players in the game. So it's sort of like sometimes, I think that the commentary is the game, but it's not. It's the people, it's playing the game that's the game. So like I just try to like kind of distance myself from, my commentary on life being life.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's really, really wise and beautiful. Yeah. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming on and hanging out with me and having a really nice conversation.
Oh, I absolutely love talking to you. It was a wonderful time.
Yeah. All right. So now we're at the point where if somebody's trying to find your podcast, not if, when people are trying to find you, where do they find you? And tell me a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, sure. I think I touched on it a little bit before. It's called Addicted to Recovery, the interactive memoir. It's a bit of a mouthful, but Addicted to Recovery would do. And I read my memoir about alcoholism, and it's called the interactive memoir because I sometimes field questions from the listeners, and then I try to address them in forthcoming episodes, or I try to integrate them into what I'm going to do with the podcast. Like occasionally I've been going through some chapters, and then someone's asked me a question that I think is important to talk about. So the next episode, I don't read a chapter, I just talk about that thing for a while. Like there was an episode on that I just kind of did talking about relapse, or talking about 12-step communities, or talking, so there's chapter episodes and then there's topic episodes. And yeah, I'm trying to do for other people what that book did for me, in terms of feeling that you can really get inside the mind of somebody and relate to their experience on an emotional level. Because I know the anecdotal details are not going to be the same for everybody, but I feel like a lot of the feelings and the conflicted ways of being in the world, like I'm trying to get that across. So yeah, that. And you can find that at addictedtorecovery.ca. I'll send you the
Perfect
links for that. And you can also find the group on Facebook, which is just the name of the podcast. And you can find me on Facebook too. I'm just Tara Nicole Boyce. It's kind of the only social media I can do, because if I do more than one, I kind of start. I am an addict, so I have to be careful about how I the types of external validation that I start to get attached to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful.
So I really hope some people check it out.
Yeah. I will put it all in the notes of the show, and I will promote that for you as well. And again, it has been so wonderful to chat with you, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day too. It was absolutely lovely connecting with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right, see you.
Okay, bye, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the Beautifully Human podcast. To hear more beautiful stories from beautiful humans, follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Peace signs up.